This is Artist Session with Thomas Yeates that the Bibliophile sponsors very irregularly. We're doing something complicated by doing both a live session during the Northwest Coast Mangani Gathering #7 and the Edgar Rice Burroughs Convention 2025. So please bear with us. I don't have a set of speakers, but if you put chat in or if you can ask questions, I can relay them to Thomas. It'd be great. Thomas wants to concentrate on his charts, and what Thomas is going to present to you all is, of course, his how he became an artist, how he got his style over the years, what his areas of interest were, and why Burroughs has been and still is important to him. And he's got this wonderful set of artwork to explain all that. So, Thomas,
Are you recording? Yeah, better hit that record button.
Oh, we did.
We already did, okay. And well, I also want to invite the guys in the room here who I can hear to ask any questions, and questions always make it more interesting. So I was born not far from here in Sacramento, California. Grew up really 100 degrees summers was not unusual, and I'd always be down at the river, swimming in this beautiful American River with the cold water coming out of the Sierra Nevada, not far away. So that was my childhood, kind of typical suburban kid, rather turned off by the sterile environment of suburbia and wanting something, always yearning for something more exciting. And the old movies provided that, and running off to live in the forest like Johnny Weissmuller and Marina Sullivan looked like fun to me. So anyway, hit the next picture. Artistically speaking, that's the next one. What happened to NC Wyatt? That's it, huh? That's an okay. There we go. Well, anyway, go back to the beginning. We go back to that, whatever was in the beginning. So in the beginning, there was, next slide, J. Allen St. John. So here you see the kind of illustration that really intrigued me as as still to this day. From the first time I saw it when I was probably 11 or something until today, this is a style of artwork that for some reason it pulls me in. I don't know why. J. Allen St. John, as I'm sure most of you know, was the most associated illustrator with Edgar Rice Burroughs during the time of his writing his story, starting with the second Tarzan novel. I think was the first one that St. John illustrated. You can go to the next slide. And here's that was pen and ink, and his pen and ink work has marveled me, and it inspired me to try to learn pen and ink. Like I say, from the time I was about 11. Here's his oil painting of Pellucid Arsine, and also when I saw his paintings, they just knocked me out. Go to the next one. And then I discovered other illustrators from that era, NC Wyeth being one of the top ones. NC Wyeth has very simple, big shapes that he works with that read immediately. People like Mike Mignola and Dan Brereton and others have said that he's like a comic book artist. He's like the greatest comic book artist because everything is big, simple shapes, and that's what you want. But he would put these incredible colors in, and he had an incredible sense of drama and his design shape. I mean, you just look at the shapes of those two big figures, the guy with one leg and a peg leg, and he's got a sword, and he's got a cane, and he's got a crutch, and he's got a parrot on his shoulder, and there's this diagonal shadow behind him, and yellow above, and kind of a lavender dark shadow below. I mean, it's just a spectacular piece of work, right? And I could do that like that, but I can't. But I sure am inspired by looking at this stuff. Okay. So then we come along with, of course, the great Harold Foster in the 1929, 30, 31. He started drawing Tarzan comics. He continued drawing Tarzan comics until 37, I think, when he created Prince Valiant. And during that time, the entire generation that would start the comic book industry was fixated on reading the Tarzan comics, the action-packed hero, muscular hero, realistically drawn, leaping from panel to panel. They were all hooked on it, and they all credit seeing Hal Foster with inspiring them. This is like Joe Kubert and Jack Kirby and John Buscema and all these great artists, particularly Kirby, always credited Foster as a huge influence. And so all that's going on back in the day. Next, and here's his Prince Valiant, and really, again, really spectacular artist. Kind of like one friend of mine said N.C. Wyeth was you know, the Hal Foster of book illustration. So there was sort of a connection there, mainly because they're both really good. So anyway, I saw this artwork. I didn't really check out Prince Valiant in the newspaper. It was in my paper, but I didn't look at it very much. It was too kind of staid and stagey or something, and it didn't grab me until I got to be a little bit older, like around 13 or so. And that was when Hal Foster turned over the finishes on Prince Valiant. He still roughed it out and wrote the story. He turned it over to John Coleman Murphy. But then I went back and sought out the reprints, etc., of Prince Valiant. And I also, of course, got turned on to Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon by reading fanzines. I visited my cousin Randy about this time, 68, who was a big comic book nut. I was not. He was real into Kirby and Steranko and Wallace Wood and DC Comics and Al Williamson, and he kind of turned me on to this whole world that I've been stuck in. It's all Randy's fault. So also around that time, of course, actually going back earlier, I discovered these Frank Frazetta book covers, and they zapped me more than anything. Before I saw St. John, I saw these first. And in fact, the book on the left, The Beasts of Tarzan, published, the 40th original Ace edition, has St. John drawings in it. And so that's really where I saw him first. And then I started going to libraries and looking for old Tarzan books. And then I saw more of his work. But about age 8, 63 or so, in a department store, and I saw the Frank Frazetta Tarzan at the Earth's Core book on a spinner rack, and it kind of mesmerized me. I'd never seen a title like that, Tarzan at the Earth's Core, with this pointy lettering and this wild cover. And my mom took note and got that for me. So that kind of led me into this path, because my house was surrounded by art. My mom was really a good artist. My sister's a really good artist, but they all were into the Impressionists and classical stuff and modern art, you know, abstract stuff, and you know, art with a capital A. Also, there was a lot of Western art. My dad was real into Remington and Russell, and we all loved Norman Rockwell and Maxfield Parrish. So, but I'd never seen anything quite like this. You know, it's just more visceral, and of course, through those, that led me to Roy Krenkel, the great Roy Krenkel, who I got to know. Wonderful man, really unusual personality, really fun. Big collector of all kinds of stuff. And through Roy Krenkel, a lot of those artists, particularly Frazetta and Williamson, were exposed to all these different illustrators. But Angelo Torres too, and all their friends, the EC guys, they were exposed to the great illustrators and people from Europe, and Norman Lindsay from Australia, who were just these phenomenal draftsmen. And I think Roy kind of brought the whole level of art up several notches. And you can go to the, and then also, of course, was Al Williamson, who I also became very good friends with. And Williamson stuff has, it's got the dynamics that you need in comics and diagonals. He's got the action figures, but he also has this kind of classy way. I mean, it's like slick advertising art. Almost, it has like the best elements of that and the best elements of pulp adventure when he's doing, particularly when he's doing fantasy adventure, which he was kind of unmatched from my perspective on his Flash Gordon work. And this is from the King Features 1965, I think about it. He did these, and his work in the mid-60s really knocked me out. He'd been trained by John Prentice to draw in the real slick Alex Raymond's late style, which was a really slick photographic. But when he used that technique he'd learned doing civilian stuff on fantasy work, wow, great results. Anyway, so then we'll go back to this is one of my early drawings. I think I was in about 6th grade, probably 6 or 7. You notice the theme and the text. In the jungle, trees, Tarzan rescues a monkey in danger. So they can't quite see the monkey, it's on the bottom. And sorry, my earliest drawing that we found recently is Mighty. It's a stick figure titled Mighty Mouse by Tommy H. 5 that somebody wrote on the paper. And it doesn't look to me any different than any other 5-year-old's drawings. So I don't think I really had anything special, although my sister disagrees. I just kept doing it over and over and over until it started getting better. So, and I started sending my work to fanzines, one of which was the Jasunian, published by Don Fraley and Bill Dutcher. And they weren't far from me up north of Sacramento a little ways. I saw them on Bob Wilkins' creature feature movie show that he would play. He was a local guy with a sci-fi horror movie host, and he had these Burroughs fans on talking about their Edgar Rice Burroughs collections, and I tracked them down, and they were publishing this fanzine, so they became my very first publisher. One of my very first publishers was this Jasunian Burroughs fan magazine. And some few years later, early 70s, I'm reading all the Burroughs books. I'm involved in all this stuff. And Joe Kubert gets contract at DC to draw Tarzan. And I really saw this as a huge boost for Tarzan. And I was, like most Burroughs fans, when I first started reading Tarzan, I was impressed by how much more interesting and rich it was than the movies. And Hubert seemed to be coming from the same direction of really trying to get that rich, exciting, gritty drama in there. Excitement. So this is, so I went off, so Joe Kubert, I met him and we kind of clicked over Tarzan, and he liked my amateur drawings. And when he started his school, he wrote to me and told me about it. And so I went from Sacramento to New Jersey to go to Joe Kubert's school in 1976 at the ripe old age of 21. And Joe, within a year, had me drawing backups in Sergeant Rock, which this is the first one. So this is my first professionally published work, a page from The Preacher in Sergeant Rock number 312. And after I graduated, I went through a kind of a stylistic challenge because I had so many different influences on me that I was having a hard time meshing it stylistically. But Williamson's friend, Al Williamson, Joe Kubert's friend, Al Williamson, called Joe Kubert and asked him if there were any young students who Joe thought would be a good assistant for Williamson, because Williamson liked to work with other artists. Didn't really need them for their talent. He liked the camaraderie and the inspiration, and he wanted some new blood to talk to. So Joe Kubert gave me Williamson's number. I called Williamson and we hit it off, and he had me come visit. Actually, he drove down to our place in New Jersey. I had graduated and was living with Steve Bissett, Rick Veach, and John Toddleton in Dover, New Jersey, not far from the Kubert School. And Williamson drove down with his 2 kids and drove me back up to what was the name of that town he was doing? Callicoon. And it's wonderful, wonderful drive, wonderful getting to meet him. He's really friendly, really fun character. And one of the first things he had me do is his assistant was Carlos Garzon, who had the monthly Flash Gordon comic book and to do for Whitman. And Carlos was behind, so they asked me to pencil an issue. So I had real green, and they gave me this whole issue of Flash Gordon to pencil. And fortunately, you know, they didn't have to redraw too much of it, but I penciled it in. Carlos, Al Williamson, and visiting a lot of the inking was done by Carlos, most of it, but Williamson and a friend of his, Victor de la Fuente, who was visiting from Europe, also inked some of it. So that's this page. Then I start getting work finally at DC, and I was doing these short stories. This is a really great one from, I can't remember which issue, but House of Mystery, written by Bruce Jones, The Scoop. Joe Kubert actually did the cover of this scene for the House of Mystery it was in. And I was kind of off to the races, very fortunate. Within a couple of years, I was getting all the work I could handle in comic books, mainly at DC, and doing these short stories, which is what I wanted to do. The comics I liked best were the short stories in the EC style comic books, or kind of Twilight Zone stories and mystery books. That's what I like to read. I was not interested in superhero characters generally. Here's a backup series I got. I did 3 or 4 of these Tejanos, which was a Western, and I got Rick Veitch to help me with them. He penciled that page. This is another backup series they gave me at DC. This one was Tejano was published in Jonah Hex. This was published in Warlord by fellow Burroughs fan Mike Grell. So this was the backup in Grell's book that I drew, and Paul Levitch wrote it. It was my first time to really get into the fantasy element, and I enjoyed that. Right before that, actually, before I started getting work at DC, I was going up to Heavy Metal magazine, because that's really where I wanted to work. My friends and I weren't that interested in drawing, you know, the superhero characters for Marvel or DC. We wanted to do experimental stuff, and that was Heavy Metal. And they were doing a special rock issue, and it was 1980, 10 years after Jimi Hendrix had died. And I said, well, why don't you let me, and they needed 6 pages. They were short because they got all their material from Europe, but they were short, 6 pages. And so Ted White, the science fiction writer, was the editor briefly, and he liked me. He said, come up with a 10-page rock and roll thing, and I'll publish it in this Heavy Metal. So I did an adaptation of the Hendrix song, Voodoo Child, where he stands up next to a mountain and chops it down with the edge of his cane. And then I did all that DC stuff, and they gave me, and Len Wein decided that he wanted to relaunch Swamp Thing. And he said if I would draw it, he would relaunch Swamp Thing. Unbeknownst to me, he also had a movie deal going with Michael Uslan, who went on to produce all the Batman films. So Uslan's first movie was Swamp Thing, and DC brought the title back, and they hired me to draw it, and I did several issues of Swamp Thing, and to this day, it's what I'm known for. You know, my art wasn't as good as it could have been, but nevertheless, that first serious job I had is the most important thing I ever did. I've done hundreds probably of Swamp Thing sketches at conventions, more than any other character ever drawn, because of those 10 issues I drew. Of Saga of the Swamp Thing, which was number 1 through 11, and Tom Mandrake did number 10. Then I came back, and I think 11 was my last one. And I kept doing the covers for a while, including this cover, which I unfortunately sold. I didn't realize when I quit the book that the writer who wrote these stories I didn't care for was going to quit. I didn't know that, or I would have stuck around and see what happened. So I said, I'm going to leave Swamp Thing. I have lots of other offers. And so right after I left Swamp Thing, the writer quit. And Len Wein hired this interesting character named Alan Moore. Alan Moore took over Swamp Thing. Len Wein was upset because he was losing his artist on his, and he created this character. So he had us real close to the book. And I said, don't worry, I'm going to bring in my friends, Steve Bissett and John Toddleben, and they're going to blow you away. And you're going to forget all about Thomas Yeates, because these guys are going to really do something incredible. And they did. And Alan Moore teamed up with Steve Bissett on pencils and John Toddleben on inks. kind of won every award in the industry for about the following 3 years. So this was the cover of the issue where Alan Moore relaunched Swamp Thing, completely dismantled his origin story and created a new origin story where he's an Earth elemental. And this is the cover, and the original just sold for $190,000 on Heritage, of which I got 0. So this is kind of exceptional piece of work. Fortunately, it's a decent cover. I mean, it doesn't really matter if it was a good cover or not, because it was the issue with that Alan Moore invented Swamp Thing. So that's Swamp Thing 21. This is 23, which I actually do own. I'm gonna probably try and sell that, but I don't have any high hopes for the price. And then I went on when I quit. I worked for Bruce Jones at Pacific Comics doing short stories again, which I really enjoyed. And then I got this Time Spirit series for Marvel. Through Valiant, and I got to know Archie Goodwin, who was the editor at Marvel. I've been socially, and he started the Epic magazine to compete with heavy metal. And I had a writer I was working with who was friends with Steve Bissett named Steve Perry, and Perry wrote Time Spirits, so we did that series for a while. It's a page from Time Spirits, colored by Steve Olaf, who became good friends.
I say next, it's easier from Trump.
And just some more traveling through time. The American Indian time travelers, who were the characters. Go to the next one. And here they are traveling back to the dinosaur era. Love drawing dinosaurs at Stonehenge, but it wasn't quite Stonehenge, but it's similar. And here they are in a lost civilization in Maine. So the Time Spirits, I did 8 issues of that. And by then I moved back to Northern California, got to know the Eclipse Comics, who were like the #3 publisher after DC and Marvel at that point, because Pacific had collapsed. And they got rights to reprint a Zorro comic graphic novel that was produced and drawn in France. And they asked me to do a new cover. And I did this cover, which everybody loved. And so that kind of got me into the world of Zorro. I was doing this cover. It was colored very sympathetically by Sam Parsons. And then I went back and did a little bit more work on Swamp Thing. I kind of was jumping around after the Time Spirits, this job and that, but I was still getting plenty of work. And in '89, I reconnected with the Burroughs gang. I had been to a Dum Dum in 1975, just by accident. I was in LA at the right time, and I had written to Danton Burroughs, who was always good about writing back and everything. So through a number of mysterious coincidences, I ended up at the Dum Dum in 1975 in Los Angeles, sitting at a table with Jerry Siegel, who created Superman, and my cousin Jane. And there's, everybody up on the stage. Vern Cordial was there, met him, and Johnny Weissmuller and Danton, and all these, Russ Manning, all these people were there. I was 20, and that was a very interesting experience. Jerry Siegel was real friendly, really happy to be there. He said straight out that that Superman was inspired by Tarzan. That simple. So anyway, I had been sending my work to the Burroughs fanzines, but I kind of backed out of that when I went to New Jersey and was breaking into the New York comic scene, was not involved in the Burroughs fandom at all. But then in '89, I kind of revisited that world and ended up at a convention in Tarzana and met all of you guys, or a lot of you guys, and reconnected with Danton. And Danton subsequently asked me to send my artwork to a publisher in Sweden called Semic, because they wanted to do Tarzan comics, but he didn't like their artwork. So I sent them my artwork. They liked it. I had good connection with Henning Fuhrer, the editor, and when we created, Henning and I did Tarzan the Beckoning, which is their samples of. And that was a challenge because he wanted me to write it, and I kind of bit off more than I could chew, but I gave it my best shot, and fans seemed to like it, especially the Burroughs fans. This is like I did some cover painting, and this is Tarzan is washed ashore on the coast of Africa, and I really tried to go to town on the artwork on this stuff. That I always wanted to draw Tarzan, but I hadn't had a chance professionally to do it. And there's elephant poachers and mercenaries, and by that time I was living in on the coast in a little town on Sonoma County in Northern California, and I was on the volunteer fire department. And so I figured, okay, if he's in the Tarzan's in the jungle today, he's going to be fighting commandos who have helicopters. So there was a rescue helicopter pilot that I worked with in the fire department when people would need to be rescued off cliffs or whatever. And a really nice guy. And I talked to him about this, that I was drawing this Tarzan versus helicopters. And as a helicopter pilot, how would Tarzan take a helicopter down? His first answer was, well, you shoot the pilot. And I said, okay, what if he couldn't what if he couldn't shoot the pilot? So he explained you'd have to snarl up the rudder, the propellers. So I had Tarzan shoot a rope. He shoots some of the guys inside, but he can't get with the bow and arrow from the top of the tree, but he can't get the pilot. So he ties a rope to his bow and shoots it into the mechanism that the propellers go around with and snarls it up. But anyway, I'm always trying to figure out interesting angles. This is one of the issues of the beckoning is sort of a Jane becomes Sheena, and this was tie the page art from there, and there's Tarzan, more Tarzan in the beckoning. This was the last cover I think I did for that series, and Tarzan and Jane visit this lost world, this lost city in a kind of alternative dimension in Africa. And after that, or actually in the middle of that, I got hired to do Dracula versus Zorro. And so as I wrapped up Tarzan, I didn't have a break. I had to jump right into my other childhood hero. The only one missing was Davy Crockett, but I had I'd kind of done him as when I did the Tomahawk issue of Swamp Thing. So we really wanted to do a Zorro count, but Dracula was more popular because, of course, in our culture, you know, evil is more popular than ever. Today, it's even more popular. It's the anti-heroes that people want. So we had to put Zorro's name, Dracula's name as the headliner, right? But never fear, Zorro won out in the end. There's some pages from that. Dracula versus Zorro. Goes to Paris, and it's a big showdown at Notre Dame. So I got to draw all this fancy stuff. It was fun. I really enjoyed this. I kind of learned a lot more about using black when drawing Zorro because his costume is black. You just kind of have to surrender to that and just fill things in black, you know. After that, after Zorro, I got a call from Mike Richardson. He finally wrestled the rights to Tarzan from Malibu. So that Mike Richardson now had the license to produce Tarzan, and he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I wanted to adapt what I thought was the most important Tarzan story after the first one, which is the second one, The Return of Tarzan, where all these kind of character developments happen with Tarzan in the return, and he goes to Opar, and we all love to see Law, etc. So I did this adaptation for Dark Horse then. Here's a couple pages. From that, he meets the Waziri tribe, it gets adopted by them, and that's the story I always wanted to see on a big budget movie, but so far we've only got the really minimal adaptation in the Elmo Lincoln's Adventures of Tarzan. That's all we've got for a Return of Tarzan so far. Inadequate, but so here's Tarzan with the Waziri going hunting, and he has all his adventures there, and he fights off the slave raiders. And later I did this is a page from Tarzan. So I started doing Tarzan for Dark Horse and I did various different projects, including penciling Tarzan versus the Moon Men, which my buddy Tim Truman wrote, the Kalkars and the Blagas invade Africa, and the Tarzan fights them off with Korak in Missouri, and Al Williamson inked it, and Sam Parsons colored it, so it was a team of friends. Then last thing I did in that period was a issue of 3 short stories of Tarzan and Pellucidar done in black and white, and I did this cover for it, which was printed at Dark Horse Presents. Then I went back to Zorro because Zorro got a really great movie starring Antonio Banderas and Anthony Hopkins and Catherine Zeta-Jones, which was really, really exceptional for genre stuff. That movie, that first one they did, it real top notch. So a creator syndicate, newspaper syndicate wanted a Zorro newspaper strip. There's never been one, so the Zorro office has called me to do this, and so I did a Zorro newspaper strip for a while, and this was like the mid to late 90s, I think. I was doing this, a lot of work. Did a duo shade with the halftones, inspired by Alex Toth, obviously, and who I also met and was a big influence on me, particularly at this time. This is, at one point it became too much work to pencil and ink the dailies and the Sunday and color the Sundays. So I hired a buddy from the Cuber School named Todd Smith. So he penciled the Zorro strip for the last year or so that I did it. And these are my inks and my colors on a couple of Sundays. Here I am back in Sacramento, maybe, at an ECOF. I think it was in Sacramento, this one. And maybe not, I think it was that one. Anyway, a fellow named Rob Greer, I think it was, took these photos. Somebody took me. I started going. I've been going to conventions, doing convention sketches for most all of my career. Seem to be able to draw at conventions. So you got to figure out how you're gonna pay the bills when you're an artist. It's not easy. So you got to do whatever you can do. You have to capitalize on. So this is Rick Norwood's Comics Review, regular magazine. I do covers for him regularly, usually Flash Gordon or Tarzan, but I've also done Mandrake and others. This is a painted illustration. I got into doing wash illustration. I love doing that. So much less work than pen and ink. You can get all the tones that I like to use without having to draw rows and rows of lines that don't bump into each other. And this was an illustration for a John Carter and the Skeleton Men, was it? No,
It was called Snowmen of Jupiter, the
Snowmen of Jupiter.
sequel to,
Yeah, there's a sequel to Burroughs Skeleton and the Snowmen of Jupiter, written by your Zoom host, Henry Franke. So anyway, someday we'll hopefully get these published. I did a series of this, Henry commissioned for me. And back then, whenever that was, 2000 or something. Here's another one. This is Sea of Monsters. And John Carter is, tell me where this is, Henry. Where does this take? Tell me about this scene.
I don't recall. This would be actually on the surface of Jupiter.
On the surface of
Yeah,
Jupiter.
The other one was on the ice shell of Jupiter,
Okay.
surrounding the inner world. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great story. I really liked Henry's story. I don't think he quite got it finished. That's probably.
Oh, it's
why.
finished.
Oh, it is
I've been
finished?
trying for 25 years to get permission to publish.
Oh, okay.
Denton said yes, and then he passed away.
Oh, darn it. So anyway, here's some of this work which people may not have seen. I think a few of them got printed in an APA, but anyway. So here's the shadow, and this was a commission. Fun. Always liked the old pulps, and this is a CD cover I did for my friend Piranha, and her CD's called Blackbird Stitches, and so I just was my first experiments with using a computer. Well, that was kind of fun, and she's a great musician. And this is went back to doing war comics briefly. This is an issue of The Escapist, which was Michael. Was that Michael? Yeah, it's Michael Chabon's character, I think. Which came out of his Cavalier and Clay series or book that he wrote. That was such a fantastic book about the origins of the comic book industry. Dark Horse published that. And then I had a dry spell where I just did commissions for a number of years, which was difficult to get by with that. And then finally in 05, my career kind of exploded again. This is from, this was a kids book publisher who was publishing a series of graphic novels of, for young readers of myths and legends. And I did 7 of these books. This is King Arthur. That was King Arthur. There's a young Arthur who's just pulled the sword from the stone. This is a page from the Odysseus graphic novel I did. Sam Glanzman I had met at a War Comics panel in San Diego and really liked him and hit it off. So I hired Sam. He was looking for work to help me pencil the Odysseus edition. This is one of those private commissions I did, an actual oil painting of some characters I think the viewers of this Zoom will recognize. That actually was based on a photo I took of one of the dum-dums. There's, you can see Mike Conran and Bill Ross and Henry are all in the background around there. I think it was after the banquet. Probably this is preceding a banquet. one of our dum-dums. And then I got hired, speaking of Edgar Rice Burroughs, and after all that other stuff I had going on with the 7 graphic novels, I got hired to draw another Burroughs project by an independent guy, Rob Hughes, who was obsessed with the book The Outlaw of Torn. And he wrote a screenplay treatment and couldn't get anybody in Hollywood to look at it, so he thought he wanted a graphic novel would help it get attention. So he paid me we ran out of money 75 pages in, but he paid me to do 75-page graphic novel that he scripted and art directed. And I got Michael William Kaluta to lay it out for me, which was a huge, huge plus. They had a lot of stuff going on at that time, and Kaluta really delivered for me. And I just think his pages were stunning. Rob, they were sketchy, and Rob Hughes couldn't figure out what was going on in Kaluta's sketches. I looked at him and I just saw this sheer brilliance. But anyway, so this is The Outlaw Prince. He renamed it. And also right around that same time, I got another Burroughs job. This time Gary Gianni had been, who I'd met over the years, and he saw some prints at a convention I had done from commissions of John Carter. And I'd done some pen and ink John Carter commissions, large ones. There was a couple I did for various collectors, and I had prints of them at my table, and he was very intrigued by them, and he bought them. And about a year later or so, I get a call from this art director that they're going to do a 3-volume John Carter of Mars hardback, profusely illustrated, and Gary Gianni turned it down and recommended me. So I have Gary Gianni to thank for getting to illustrate the Fall River Barnes and Noble published John Carter of Mars that I did. And so I didn't do them in pen and ink, I did them in wash though, because I'd gotten really into that. So here's an illustration from that. And also an assignment, like I said, my career was just going crazy. I got hired by Louis L'Amour's family, or by Random House, to work with Louis L'Amour's family and do an adaptation of one of his Westerns, which was a real dream job because I'd always loved Louis L'Amour's work. And I'd read him when I was in high school. In between Tarzan books, I'd read Louis L'Amour because my mother told me you can't only read Tarzan. You have to read something else too. And that was one of the books I read, or one of the authors I read was Louis L'Amour. So that was great. A lot of work. His son, Beau L'Amour, was very heavily art directed what I do. But I think some of the stuff I disagree with that he wanted me to do, but I think for the most part, he made it better. So, and then another job comes along, and I can't resist, which is working with the great Sergio Aragonés, who's such a fantastic guy. I mean, anytime he's at a show, he's the coolest guy in the room. As Sergio, actually, I think it was Mike Richardson's idea, wanted to do Gru the Wanderer, who's a barbarian, satire of the barbarian genre, meets Conan, but he wanted Conan drawn. Actually, Bill Stout, I think, was supposed to do Conan, but he wouldn't do it because they wouldn't let him retain the rights. Bill always wants to retain the rights to his work. So they worked their way down the list of artists and eventually got to me. And I said, well, I can't resist. This is just too good. So I did this Grew versus Conan book, which was really fun. Working very closely with Sergio, where we're sending the pages back and forth, drawing around each other's art, you know. That's pencils of a cover. And here's a splash page where Conan is leaping at all this multi-headed hydra of Gru Hydra monster, which is a fictitious story within a fictitious story, where the people in the bar are doing the telephone game, where every time a story gets repeated, it gets changed and morphs and grows, and that's what this is illustrating. So they're talking about what a monster Gru is and how Conan's going to have a hard time with it. Then I got Prince Valiant, and here's the pencils of an early Prince Valiant, and on top of all this other stuff. So I was hiring people to help me left and right so I could get all those other jobs done and then just focus on Prince Valiant, because I knew from experience that this was the best job I was ever going to find. So anyway, here's that page with the inks. Prince Valiant and his buddy Gawain are encountered a kind of a Robin Hood gang led by a lady who was a maid in the local lord's castle, and she goes renegade. It's a really fun story. Mark Schultz writing it, and Mark was also very close friends with Al Williams. So Mark and I have a really good bond, and we just have a blast doing Prince Valiant, our brainstorming the story sessions and stuff. Here's a page in color where they're marooned on an island in the Mediterranean, and they get attacked by pirates, and the pirates were inspired by the pirates in the Jules Verne movie with Haley Mills, Swiss Family Robinson, was it? Was that Swiss Family Robinson?
And that wasn't Jules Verne or Haley Mills, but that was a movie with pirates.
John Mills.
John Mills, yeah. or
John
Bob.
Mills. Yeah.
it was-
That was Swiss Family Robinson.
Yeah,
Right? Yeah.
Johann Weiss, I think.
Right. Oh, really? Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Got my famous people mixed up there. So anyway, there's pirates in that movie that didn't look like Caribbean pirates. So I thought, well, this is in the Mediterranean, so they can't be Captain Blood and those guys, or Captain Kidd or Blackbeard. It's got to be different looking pirates. And I remembered how cool I thought those pirates were. In fact, who was that? Wasn't there a famous actor? It wasn't Toshiro Mifune, but another guy who played the pirate lead.
I don't know. I don't remember.
Anyway.
Yeah, what was his name?
So I get my inspiration from movies a lot. I'm probably way more into studying movies than I am comic book art.
That was the same guy that was in Bridge on the River Kwai.
Uh-huh.
What was
Yes,
his name?
yeah, some kind of sympathetic general, right?
Yeah,
So anyway, it's more of these pages, Prince Valiant pages from my first couple of years on with the character. You always have to do these sailing across the seas scenes in Prince Valiant, because that's they didn't have superpowers, they can't fly, you know, and they don't have airplanes, and they don't have trains, and they don't have automobiles, so they sail all over the place. So I have to learn to draw sailing scenes. And there's another Prince Valiant scene. Always got a lot of romance with him and his wife, and which is great, because so many heroes, they don't have their wives. They're, you know, like playing the field, so to speak. But so I really like that you've got an actual functioning couple here, and which Hal Foster wrote into the script originally. So there's another scene where this was like a year, maybe 3 years into it. He's in up in Uzbekistan, and using the old trick of stampeding the horse thieves, stolen horses through their camp to rescue the captive friends. And we had horses when I was young. I got to shovel out stables every morning on my way to school. So I understand, I have a feel for horses. I'm not that great at drawing them when I look at the old guys that were all so much better. But I can get by with my horses, so they're kind of fun to draw, but time consuming. And I think that's the end of the show. That was my last one. Is there anything else there, Henry?
That's all I'm showing coming up.
So there you have it. I've pretty much just been doing Prince Valiant since I got it. Since you know I finished I did a second Sergio Aragonés project, and that was Gru meets Tarzan. But I put this slideshow together before I finished that, so that's out there too. But basically, it's pretty much just Prince Valiant. And if you go to Comics Kingdom website, you can follow Prince Valiant every week. Every Sunday, there's another one by Mark Schultz and myself, and that's where you just go to Comics Kingdom website. That's the website of King Feature Syndicate, and they've got right on a list of alphabetical hundreds of different strips that they control, and right below Popeye is Prince Valiant. So questions?
Yeah, Tom, you mentioned that you sent artwork to another artist and you drew around each other. Well, what goes on when two artists collaborate like that? What are you actually doing with each other?
Well, Sergio wrote the story, and the way he writes is he'll sketch, because he just sketches continually. He just loves to draw, and he just does little cartoon drawings continually. So when he's writing a story, he's drawing it. I mean, they might just be so simple that you might not be able to tell what it is, but that's how he thinks out a story. He sketches it out. So everything starts, it's already got a layout. Even though it's real simple, there's a layout when you work with Sergio. And so he would send me these layouts and say, this is with a description of the story. Mark Evanier, his old buddy and the great comics historian, Mark Evanier writes the final dialogue, because Sergio doesn't have confidence in his English, because that's his second language. He's Spanish speaking. And so the pages that are prominently my character, I would just start the page myself, and maybe I'd use his layout if he has one. Some of the pages that were prominently me, he wouldn't lay them out. But if they have both characters there, and he'd do a layout just to think it through, and he wanted me to redraw it. But since it already has a layout, I would often just use his layouts because they were terrific layouts. And so that's how it would start. He's got a layout, and I will either use his layout and draw my characters on his layout, or if I have a different idea for the layout, I'll do my own thing and leave the areas empty for his characters, and maybe I'll sketch in a cartoon or three, his style, for fun. So then I'll send that back to him, and we send the pages back and forth. And once you're one of the artists has inked their material, then he sent it to the next guy so that he can ink up to the edges of the back. Like I black in my silhouetted jungle behind character group, for example. Or he would put his crowds of cartoon characters behind my realistically rendered Tarzan or Conan. And it was fun. It was very challenging.
It seems like if
Extremely
we're
time-consuming.
all in the same room, you'd be doing this faster.
Yeah, we weren't.
You put by mail. Wow.
We weren't. In fact, I think some of this happened during COVID. We really weren't in the same room. Although I have gone down and visited him and hung out with him.
So you're very careful not to cough on the page.
That's
Question, Thomas, what Burroughs character, world, or novel have you not illustrated that you would like to?
Oh. There are some, I remember really enjoying a couple of the later ones. The Land of Hidden Men, I thought was I really enjoyed that. I read that later, and it was written later, and the Beyond the Farthest Star. I also really like, I mean, I've done a few Carson of Venus, but I would have liked to maybe have done more of those. Very heavily influenced and very, very heavily impressed by Kaluda's and Len Weem's adaptation in the back of Korak, of DC's Korak comics. Those are just remain stunning Burroughs comics, and very inspiring to me. And I like that stuff. I like a lot of those characters. It's kind of fun to do more John Carter because there's other characters besides John Carter in those stories. And Pellucidar, I've done very little Pellucidar. That was my favorite Burroughs series for a while, was Pellucidar, and I've done very little of that. Although I did do that Tarzan and Pellucidar thing, which it didn't have the Pellucidar characters in it really. It had stuff, creatures and stuff that I made up that were inspired by Burroughs, but it wasn't Abner Perry and Beyond the Beautiful, or I did Jana the Red Flower of Zoram, or etc. Tanar. I thought Tanar was one of the great books. I just love Tanar. That would have been a lot of fun to draw. The pirates versus pterodactyls, stuff. Why they never made a movie of that, I don't know. I suggested that when was one time the guys Stan Cantor, who produced those very successful Mummy films about 20 years ago with Brendan Fraser. He was in at Dan's office one time, and Dan was talking, and Dan called me up and put him on the phone and stuff. And I was kind of like in the loop with him, with Dan and Mike Richardson at that time, trying to come up with a Burroughs movie concept. And at that time, they only wanted to do remakes, right? It had to be something that had established itself, and then they would do a reboot it. And Mike's a big fan of Pellucidar, and I said, and Tarzan at the Earth's Core is one of the great Pellucidar books. I said, Mike, just do Tarzan at the Earth's Core, but he always wanted to do his own things that he thought of. And so I also suggested to him, since the studios only wanted to do remakes, said, well, remake The Land That Time Forgot. It's a decent movie, and it's just screaming to be remade with proper CGI dinosaurs. Come on, this is obvious. There was two of them. You could remake them both. But then, didn't happen.
So Thomas, I seem to remember while you're doing your Prince Valiant gig, that you said, because you had me do this one time, you said that sometimes you recruit some of your friends and have them pose for you so you could get a panel.
Oh yeah. So using photographs or drawing from live models is just comes with the field of illustration. That's just how illustration been done always. I mean, the great illustrators, I call them illustrators, who painted the Sistine Chapels and stuff, Michelangelo and Da Vinci and all those great Renaissance painters. They were really illustrators who get commissioned by the church to draw scenes from the Bible. And that's where the money was, or portraits of rich people. And they would pose their subject, and paint it. They didn't have photography, but they were doing the same kind. You're copying from life or copying from a photo is how you get it right. And so that's just the way it's done. And I was introduced to using photos in high school by a teacher who, in order for his students who may or may not have had any artistic ability, to bring something home to the parents that looked cool, he taught all of his students how to trace a photo. Find an interesting photo there was some kind of trick you'd use to make it kind of more high contrast, to pump up the contrast. And you just trace the outlines of the shapes, of the shadows, and fill it one in, with one color, one with another color. This is the late 1960s. That was a style of art on record covers and advertising and movie posters. He would do this high contrast image with two simple colors on the dark and the light. So I did that when I was in high school. So I'd always worked with photos pretty much from the time I got serious about art. And I would go back, I could also draw it all out of my head, but the photos give it a little extra level of realism, and it just looked better. I liked it better, and I was seduced by Williamson's incredible technique and spent a lot of time with him. And he became a primary influence, and he used a lot of photos. So I've always gone back and forth, posing people using photos. I have a mirror for whenever I'm drawing hands. I'll look at my hand in a mirror to draw the hand right, because they're very difficult. So I always looking at my hands to get the hands right. And I will use actors sometimes in movies for a character, and the character looks similar. I have friends pose. When I first went and met Al Williamson, he had me put on a ski cap, swimming ski cap, to be the bald villain who, in his strip, Dr. Seven, who was based on Ming the Merciless. And we did a fight scene, where I'm falling over, and we photographed it, and I'm in, it's one of the last year or so of Secret Agent Corrigan dailies that Williamson did. I'm in there as Dr. Seven. So it's just something we do, Oh yeah, I need a photo. You got a minute,
Yeah, you put me in your Prince Valiant comics.
And you're Tarzan. You were Tarzan. I was doing the Gru meets Tarzan when your house burned down, and you came to stay with me.
Oh, wow.
And no, and you were, you're long and lean like Tarzan, and there was a back view, and I said, David, take your shirt off and crawl across the sofa like this. And so he's crawling across the sofa like this.
Yeah.
Of course, he's not on the sofa in my place in the comic. He's up in a tree.
Thomas, when you did the Allah Friends, you used Mike Kaluta as one of the characters. Have you used other contributors or to the stories and put their face in this story?
Yeah. I just found the originals of one of my very early DC jobs. I'm sure I got it through Joe Kubert, because Kubert wouldn't let us sign those jobs that he got for us. He's claimed we thank him later. So that early amateur work was unsigned by myself, Tom Mandrake, Jan Dursma, Rick Beach, Ron Randall, Steve Bissett. There's early work by all of us in DC Comics at that time, mostly war books. But there's one of them I found, and I drew Joe Kubert as a character. And I drew Al Williamson as a character in the same story. It's a little science fiction story called, I just found that. I totally forgot about it. What Demon Dwells Within, I think was the title of the story. So, and that had a cover. He was I remember that Joe Orlando, I guess, was impressed. He might have been the editor, and he did a cover for that based on that story I drew for that DC comic book. Maybe it was unexpected, I'm not sure. But yes, in other words, a sorry long answer. Yes, I do draw other creators. Ron Randall posed for me in a Prince Valiant. He's leaping across the room with a knife. About the stage. He's got great expression. He's real good
Are you
performance.
talking about the actor that was in King of Kings?
No, I'm talking about my old Kubert school buddy, who was in the year behind me. And artist from the Portland area, Ron Randall. His character is Trekker, but he's done lots of other work in comics throughout he assisted me on Swamp Thing way back when we were all in New Jersey. And that Ron Randall. But I brought him up to Al Williamson's house, and Williamson was always talking about the actor you're referring to. The Williamson's a big movie buff, so I knew there was an actor with the same name. Any other questions, gang?
How many newspapers is Prince Valiant in?
It's kind of a trade secret, I think, or something, 'cause I've never been able to get a straight
They won't
answer.
tell you.
Everybody just generally says about 300.
Mm.
You know, it gets canceled, so a few of them got canceled. When Gannett recently took over a lot of newspapers, the evil corporation, and they dumb everything down, these big entities buy up a string of newspapers, and so. I know they took Prince Valiant out of their print papers, but the online versions of the papers still had it, I believe, of the ones that lost it. This was going back about a year or two. It's still in this, there was two of the papers, I used to see it in Northern California, both Stockton and Reno, which is actually Nevada over the border, but they stopped carrying it about a year or so ago, but Santa Rosa, Press Democrat still carries Prince Valiant.
Yeah, I read it in the Press Democrat. Press Democrat was sold recently, so
Mhm.
I wonder.
You know, their format for it changed.
Yeah.
The format, the last one I saw, they were giving it a much larger position on the page. It had been crowded out by that pesky so-and-so Doonesbury. But they put it in a different place on the page. The last one I saw, they gave it, you know, it is like a full third of the page. It's like, wow, maybe the new owners liked it, I don't know.
I think that's how they do it now, yeah.
It's in the Washington Post.
Good, oh yeah, it's still in the Washington Post, great. There was a fan who used to send those to me, but she hasn't sent them in a long
Do
time.
you want them?
What's that?
Do you want us to cut them out for you?
If you want to cut out one once in a while, send it to me, that'd be great.
Okay.
It's interesting to see how if the registration is way off, and because I changed my art style quite a bit when I started seeing how it was printed, because the fine long, you know, lines of pen and ink that I used to create tones and shading were very technical and very stupid reasons. Cause a lot of problem in the reproduction digitally.
Okay.
And trying to figure out how to stop that I went on and on for like years, trying to figure out how to stop this problem, this registration problem. But consequently, I try to leave that out, the shading lines, because of the printing problem in the newspaper. Online it looks fine, no problem. And the foreign reprints, it's reprinted, Prince Valiant's reprinted in Germany and Spain and Portugal that I know of, and the reprints I've seen all look decent. But so I like to see how it's printed, because that affects how I draw it. And you know, because the main, I think of the main outlet as the newspapers. So thanks, yeah, that'd be great. Did we use up our time?
Even with our late start, we're over an hour now of actual meaningful content. So if anyone wants to ask a last question, or Thomas.
Was there any online questions?
I have no chats in. Anyone want to ask a question from the Zoomosphere?
Did you just make up that word?
I did. If you want to ask a question, you go off of mute, and I'll listen to my little tinny speakers, or you can do a chat. Yes, Dean.
Just wonder if any of your series of Prince Valiant will be collected in book form. I know Gary Gianni's was, and I'd really love to have some of that permanently instead of just looking at it online.
Dean Richardson's question was, is there any plans of putting Thomas Yeates' Prince Valiant into reprint editions?
Well, like I said, you can get them now in German.
Oh.
On Amazon, I think, or from my website. They're really nicely done, but in English language, the rights are owned by Fantagraphics, who are continuing their entire run of reprints, and they're still deep into the John Colin Murphy phase that went on for over 30 years, I think. So they haven't gotten out of that phase. They're still in, like, you know, 1990 something, maybe, in the years that they're reprinting every year. They put out more volumes. And so then they have to go through the Gary, finish up with that, and then go through with Murphy, and then they have to do the Gary Gianni period. And then they'll start printing mine. So best guess is they're at least 6 years ago from doing English, 6 years away from doing the English language collection of Prince Valiant that I drew. So, you know, maybe I don't, and that's English language, you know, you know, if a publisher in Australia wanted to do it in English, they still can't do it, even though it's another country, because it's English, which is usually how the laws go, so it's the language. But the Spanish and the Portuguese and the German are all done really well. The Spanish and Portuguese, I think only have 1 year at a time, and they're a little bit smaller. The German one, it's a larger format, which is nice. And they all have, you know, introductions and sketches by me and little extra things. And the last one that just came out from Germany had an interview with the colorist, which I can't read because it's in German, but I can't see if how much he's like blaming me for all the grief I get. Not doing what I want to do. I don't know why he can't read my mind.
So Thomas, going from comics to movies for a second here. I've been for years. I've been saying that they got to do a movie of Tarzan at the Earth's core. It would have not only Tarzan. You can throw Jane in it. It has the Waziri. It could reintroduce Pellucidar. In fact, I wrote a screen treatment for it and sent it to Henry. So he's got a copy of it.
All right. When did you do that?
I think it should be done through Netflix.
Wait, when did you do that?
Oh, I don't know. I sent it to him about how long ago was that? A couple of months ago.
Oh, recent.
Or something. Yeah. And yeah, I wrote this whole treatment out, and where we could have Jane in it, and the speaking of evil corporations, there's an evil corporation involved with a good female villain, and then we got Jane as the the female heroine. But
yeah, I'm all for it.
yeah, I think that would be it. Oh, good.
Yeah, it would. As I
bring up
mentioned.
the Waziri for it.
Yeah.
Waziri, even more than they are in movie. They have some of those great set pieces like the fight with the mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and holy mackerel.
Yeah,
They might have some real mammoths for that in a few years.
I wish they'd leave those poor creatures alone. I hope they don't do that.
Well, if they do, they better recreate more than one, or it'll be awfully lonely.
Anyway, Tarzan at the Earth's core. I think the Burroughs fans should rise up and say, "Hey, we want to see Tarzan at the Earth's core."
I think it's, custom made, for today's action adventure. And as I said, I mentioned it to Mike Richardson when he was looking to produce, Burroughs stuff and trying to figure out which Burroughs project to produce. And he ended up being co-producer on Skarsgård Tarzan, Mike was. But I tried to get him to do that, David. He didn't go for it. But good luck with if they need somebody to help on brainstorming it, I'm available.
I will tell you, 2 years ago at San Diego Comic-Con, I had dinner with the ERB Incorporated guys, and the guy that became their vice president for film production, whatever the official title is, Wolf Larson. I said, that's the movie that needs to be made. That's the one that's gonna get an audience. Only problem is you have to fight with King Kong Godzilla at the Earth's core. That's stolen your thunder. But so that concept of possibly breaking into a wider audience has been pushed. I haven't talked to anyone there lately. So as we know, film and television production is close to winning lotteries because it's tough to get something into production.
Yeah, very, very difficult, and it's tougher still to have it come out right.
But in the end, if you gotta keep pushing it, or you'll never have nothing will
Yeah.
happen. All right, we're an hour and 10 minutes into the active content. I think it's probably a good place here. Thomas, you want to close out? Any thoughts?
Well, thanks for your interest, and it's been quite the ride for me. I'm still hanging in there and enjoying it. I don't know much longer I'm gonna last. It's, you know, kind of a high work job in some ways, even though you're just sitting at a desk. It's, you get the eye strain and the back issues, taxing you, but, I'm still in there swinging. Look forward to seeing the rest of you guys at next event or some other show. I still do my occasional out of town shows, just went to one in Italy. So thanks for your interest.
All right, thanks. All right, thanks for everyone here in Roseville, California. Thanks for everyone out there, and everyone have a good weekend.